In 1981, Hasbro partnered with Marvel Comics to develop the world and characters of their new toy line, G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, and to produce a comic book promoting it. The result was such a success that 2 years later, the companies teamed up again to do the same for the Transformers. At last, these are the basics on the Marvel Transformers comic book. It was Marvel's editor-in-chief, Jim Shooter, who devised the basic storyline of the Transformers, two warring factions of alien robots from the planet Cybertron stranded on Earth. Writer Bob Budiansky created names and profiles for the characters, and was assigned the role of editor on a 4-issue, bi-monthly Transformers comic book miniseries. Promoted by a fully animated TV commercial, the series launched in May 1984 and told the story of the Transformers' arrival on Earth and the Autobots befriending human Buster Witwicky and his father Sparkplug, who helped them defeat the Decepticons by poisoning their fuel. Like most of Marvel's licensed comic books at the time, such as Godzilla, Rom, or Micronauts, the series was set within the Marvel Universe, even featuring a guest appearance from Spider-Man in issue number 3. Now, it's fair to say that the series was a bit of a mess, with 3 writers on only 4 issues: Bill Mantlo, Ralph Macchio, and Jim Salicrup, and loose, inconsistent artwork by Frank Springer, who wasn't even given finished character designs to work from until halfway through. However, that didn't stop it being a sell-out success, with the first issue going back to press twice, and it was immediately decided to extend it into an ongoing monthly title. Accordingly, the 4th issue ended on a cliffhanger, and after a few months' break, the comic resumed with issue number 5 in March of 1985, with Budiansky himself now taking the reins as writer, a role he would continue in for 4 years. In his time on the series, Budiansky established concepts and characterizations that would prove foundational to Transformers lore, one of his first being the introduction of the Autobot Matrix. But his main focus was on the interaction between Transformers and humans. Unlike the cartoon, in which the Autobots were welcomed as heroes, in the comic they were feared and distrusted by mankind, and many issues featured guest human characters, both good and bad, from ordinary civilians to the US government, becoming caught up in the Transformers conflict. Though he delivered plenty of dramatic Transformer-centric stories, his own personal favourite being the bleak 2-parter, Return to Cybertron, Budiansky is usually best remembered by fans for the quirkier, offbeat tales this human focus led to. A small-time mobster partnering up with a gun-mode Megatron, Buster Witwicky combating a mind-controlling Decepticon car wash, Transformers becoming Hollywood stars and professional wrestlers, and perhaps most infamously, a computer programmer killing Optimus Prime after he lost a video game duel with Megatron. With only 12 issues in a year, the comics need to constantly introduce the large numbers of new characters steadily being added to the toy line meant that only a small number of robots ever really got the spotlight in Budiansky's stories. Standouts included Ratchet, who battled impossible odds to rescue his comrades when they were captured; Shockwave, driven by cold logic to overthrow Megatron as Decepticon leader; Skids, who desired to experience life on Earth; the arrogant Grimlock, who replaced Optimus Prime as Autobot leader; Blaster and Goldbug, who went on the run when they couldn't deal with Grimlock's tyrannical leadership; and Shockwave's successor, the micromanaging Ratbat. Notable original characters included ill-fated Autobot spy Scrounge, Decepticon despot Lord Straxus, the Autobots' industrialist ally GB Blackrock, and robot-hating supervillain Circuit Breaker. With such a constantly growing cast, though, the idea that the series took place within the mainstream Marvel Universe was quietly dropped, and the series was now considered to be set in its own separate world. Multiple artists contributed to the title during Budiansky's run, primarily Moon Knight co-creator Don Perlin, who was the book's first regular penciler from 1985 to 1987, Wonder Woman artist Jose Delbo, who drew the series from 1987 to 1990, and Nelson Yomtov, who coloured every single issue.
The comic's success also led to the production of several tie-in miniseries across 1986 and 1987.
The Transformers universe, collecting Budiansky's character profiles, an adaptation of The Transformers the movie, a crossover with G.I. Joe, and The Headmasters,
introducing Fortress Maximus and the other new characters from the 1987 toy range,
who then joined the cast of the monthly title. Meanwhile, in the United Kingdom, Marvel's British division, Marvel UK, were publishing their own version of the comic. Launched in September 1984, each issue of the UK comic included a reprint of half a US issue
and a selection of backup strips, some original, some reprinted from other Marvel series.
But during the extended gap between the publication of the 4th and 5th issues of the US series, a handful of UK original stories had to be produced to fill for time. The first of these, the haunting Man of Iron, would later be reprinted in the US series in 1987. But things didn't end there. Initially published every 2 weeks, the British comic's success saw it go weekly in 1985, meaning that the series was now reprinting the US stories faster than they were being produced, requiring a regular flow of UK original material to fill out the schedule. British writer Simon Furman crafted new tales to fit the breaks in the US narrative, illustrated by a rotating stable of artists including Jeff Anderson, Will Simpson, Jeff Sr., Dan Reed, Lee Sullivan, and Andrew Wildman. Early stories often focused on Furman's favourite characters, the Dinobots, whose leader Grimlock he wrote as more of a noble anti-hero compared to Budiansky's arrogant tyrant. But things changed in late 1986 with the landmark serial Target 2006, a tie-in with the UK release of The Transformers the movie, in which the new characters from the film travelled back in time from the future era in which the movie was set to the present day. Afforded much greater storytelling freedom by this cast of characters who weren't part of the US comic, Furman continued the saga over the next 2 years, with a run of stories in which the deranged future Decepticon Galvatron schemed to dominate both time periods. Additionally, hardback annuals were released every year, containing new stories that often tied into the weekly comic's ongoing narrative. Furman's stories were just as key to the development of Transformers lore as Budiansky's, introducing characters and concepts like the Autobot commando unit the Wreckers, robotic bounty hunter Death's Head, who was spun off into his own comic, and an origin story for the Transformer race that depicted them as creations of the God of Light, Primus. Tonally very different to the US stories, their epic scope helped make the comic one of the highest-selling boys' action titles in the country. As 1988 came to an end and 1989 began, change was in the air. Budiansky had celebrated the US comic's 50th issue with the Underbase Saga, in which Starscream acquired cosmic power and wiped out a huge swathe of the cast, while Furman saw in the UK comic's 200th issue with Time Wars, the conclusion of his years-long time travel saga. At this point, a fatigued Budiansky decided to step down as writer on the American title, and chose Furman to take over the series from issue number 56. Furman brought over several ideas from his UK work, including the Primus origin story, and over the next year and a half, crafted another of his now trademark epics, building towards the coming of the monster planet Unicron. In the process, he also shone a light on newer characters from the toy line, making cult favourites out of bots like Autobot Detective Nightbeat, Obsessive Decepticon leader Thunderwing, and Skeletal Samurai Bludgeon. Art for his run was provided by fellow British creators Jeff Sr., who alternated with Jose Delbo, and Andrew Wildman, who took over as regular penciler for the series' final year. With one writer on both series, the US and UK comics now had the potential to be more connected than ever. But unfortunately, decreasing sales saw the UK title hit with cutbacks and a format change, with each issue now containing a few reprinted US pages and a short UK original black and white strip.
This unanticipated change led to the US and UK stories falling out of sync, with UK strips being printed weeks or months before the US reprints they were meant to tie into. And eventually, in 1990, Furman abandoned attempts to tie them together, and instead, in conjunction with re-releases of older Transformers toys going on in Europe at the time, transitioned the UK material into more comedic strips about Grimlock leading the Autobots' new Earth Force team, which didn't really fit with the US continuity. These strips ran until September, whereupon the production of UK original material stopped entirely and the comic went full reprint. Sales were also running low on the American series, and it was intended that the climax of Furman's Unicron saga in 1990's issue number 75 would be the book's final issue. However, it was granted a reprieve at the last second, running for 5 more issues, before finally ending with issue number 80 in May 1991, in which the Decepticons were exiled to the far reaches of the galaxy, and the victorious Autobots at last returned home to a rebuilt Cybertron. The UK series would continue to reprint the US stories, but when they ran out, it too came to an end with issue number 332 in January 1992, with Furman writing one final original story for the last UK annual that served as an epilogue to the series. Like the original Transformers cartoon, the Marvel comic is one of the most influential pieces of Transformers media ever produced, and its stories, concepts, characterizations, and iconic images continue to shape new series today. To Budiansky, it was just a job he did for a few years and moved on from, but it made Simon Furman's name synonymous with the franchise and led to a lifelong career writing Transformers comics, animation, games, and more that continues today. His work on the UK comic in particular was a formative experience for many young comic fans in the British Isles, and directly inspired some of today's most celebrated Transformers comics creators like James Roberts, Nick Roche, and Jack Lawrence. But no publisher can hold a license forever, and in 2022, Marvel's days of printing Transformers comics are long past. Over the years, reprint collections of the US and UK series have been released by several of the publishers to have held the license since, including Titan Books, IDW Publishing, and Hachette Partworks. And the world of the comic has been revisited and continued in a variety of different ways. Marvel published their own sequel just a few years after the original series ended, in conjunction with the 1993 toy line, Transformers Generation 2. This series would be Marvel's final Transformers publication, and was written by a returning Furman, who disregarded the epilogue he'd written for the UK series to craft a 12-issue story about the Autobots fighting a new second generation of Decepticons. In 2007, the Transformers Collectors Club produced their own continuation of the Marvel Universe, picking up where the original series had ended, ignoring both the UK original stories and Generation 2, as a tie-in with the Transformers Classics toy line. And in 2012, IDW Publishing released Regeneration 1, a 20-issue series by Furman and Wildman taking place 20 years after the end of the original series, ignoring both the UK, G2, and Club stories, to bring a definitive sense of closure to the Marvel Universe. But even that wasn't the end of the story, as IDW would bring Furman back again for the prequel miniseries Transformers 84. Whether or not this will truly be the final published story set in the Marvel Universe remains to be seen, but in the hearts and minds of fans, as Furman himself is so often fond of saying, it never ends. And those are the basics on the Marvel comic. Did you read it back in the day or experience it in reprints? What are your favorite stories and characters? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more Transformers history like this. Plus, if you're able to support the show on Patreon, you can get early access to new episodes.